Hi, Cornerstone. Pastor Nick here to discuss the final chapter of Sinclair Ferguson's book devoted to God's church. It's always a great feeling to come to the end of a book, especially a good book. And I experienced that feeling just a little while ago as I finished chapter 11. And as we come to the end of this book, as we reach the end of it this week, I hope and pray that God has used it in your life as He has used it in mine to do what the title says, to deepen your devotion toward the Church of Jesus Christ, and specifically toward Cornerstone, towards the local congregation that you are a member of. The 11th chapter of Ferguson's book was on evangelism, on outreach and mission, and it is, as I feel like I say with every chapter, it's worth the read. One of the things that struck me in the chapter was the point that Ferguson made that the New Testament is not so interested in giving us a strategy or a method for engaging unbelievers with the gospel. It actually operates under an entirely different assumption and paradigm, and that is not that we are going and asking the unbelieving world questions that then lead to gospel conversations, though I will make a caveat here. I think we ought to be doing that. But what Ferguson is arguing from passages such as 1 Peter 3:15, always being ready to give a reason for the hope that is within us to anyone who asks, what he's arguing is that our lives ought to be lived in such a radically countercultural, otherworldly manner that the watching world is coming to us with questions that then open doors for gospel conversation. Ferguson is a Scot. He is a native of Scotland. And if you've ever heard him preach, which if you haven't, you should look up some of his sermons right now and listen to him. He's one of my favorite preachers, a very gifted preacher, a very godly man. And one of the things that you'll notice immediately as you listen to him is that he's not an American. He's not an American. He has a very strong accent. And he makes the point in this chapter that oftentimes when people hear him preach for the first time, they'll come up to him afterwards and ask him, "Where are you from?" You see, they recognize that he's not from around here. There's something different about his accent. And even if they can't pinpoint, oh, this guy is Scottish, they know enough that it elicits within them a question. And Ferguson draws that analogy and then applies it to our lives as Christians, as the church in this world, that when people see our lives should be so otherworldly, they should be so pervaded with the grace of Jesus Christ, so pervaded with His love and His peace and His joy, that when the world sees us, they recognize, man, those people, they're not from around here. And they begin to ask, "Where are you from?" Because they see that our citizenship is in heaven, that we are strangers, we are aliens here. And then that lifestyle opens doors for wonderful gospel conversations. And so we need to be ready to have those conversations, Ferguson is saying. We need to know how to respond to the various questions that might come our way. We need to know and to have the boldness to engage the watching world with the truths of the gospel, truths which are very offensive, by the way. And so Ferguson makes this point that our lives, that the way we live, the way we interact with each other, the way we respond to trials and tribulations, that all of these things ought to serve as means by which God in His grace opens doors for the gospel. And I think this is one of the reasons why the gospel always flourishes when the church is under persecution and is remaining faithful and steadfast under persecution, because the world looks at them and goes, wait a minute, what in the world is going on here? There are these Christians that are suffering greatly. They're dying. They're losing everything. And yet they are not willing to renounce their faith. They're not willing to renounce Christ. What is the reason for the hope that is in you? And I was particularly convicted by this point as I looked at my own life, because I don't have very many people asking me for a reason for the hope that is within me. I don't have many people asking me gospel questions just by looking at my life. And I think the reason is twofold as I think about my own life. First, the reason is because my life really isn't exuding the love and joy and peace that it ought to. But second, I wonder whether I'm intentionally cultivating relationships with unbelievers as I ought to, that then is leading to such questions and such discussions. And as I look at my own life, this is not something I'm particularly good at, this area of evangelism. It's not an area I feel strong in. As I look at our denomination and even at our local church, I don't think it's something that we're particularly good at. This is an area that we need desperately for the Lord to grow us in. We need to grow in living in such a way that the unbelieving world is approaching us, but we also need to learn how to engage the watching world with questions and with statements that would bring them to Jesus Christ. We need to learn how to evangelize, friends. And as we approach this new year, let us resolve afresh to seek to grow in this area. And let us be asking God to grow us in this area as individuals, as families, as a church, as a denomination. Let us be praying and seeking God that He might grow us to be an evangelistic people. I want to close this short video by reading a quote. It's not a quote that's in the chapter, but it's a quote that has struck me and stuck with me, and that terrifies me, honestly, or at least it ought to. It doesn't terrify me enough. But this is a quote from Alexander Duff. He's a Scottish Presbyterian. This is a Reformed man. And he wrote this. He said, "What is the whole history of the Christian church but one perpetual proof and illustration of the grand position?" This is the whole of church history summarized in one statement. And this is what it is: that an evangelistic or missionary church is a spiritually flourishing church. And that a church which drops the evangelistic or missionary character speedily lapses into superannuation and decay. If you want to see a church in decay, if you want to see a church that is heading in the direction of uselessness, this is it. It's the church that's dropped its evangelistic and missionary endeavor. And may that not be said of us, friends. Let us seek God that He might grow within us this evangelistic and missionary endeavor, so that we would be a spiritually flourishing church by His grace.